Hello everyone, and welcome back. Whether you're winding down for the night, curious about our ancient past, or just looking for a calm moment to learn something fascinating, you're in exactly the right place. Today's journey takes us far back in time, to an era long before fabric, fashion, or even the simplest stitched garments. For more than 100,000 years, early humans lived completely naked. No coats, no shoes, not even a scrap of fur to keep them warm. And yet, they survived, thrived, and eventually conquered every climate on Earth. How did they do it? That's the incredible story we're about to explore. This isn't just a tale of survival. It's an educational look at how our bodies, minds, and communities evolved to face the elements without clothing. We'll see how our ancestors shed their fur, turned their skin into natural armor, mastered fire as humanity's first blanket, built shelters from caves to makeshift hideouts, and even used nature itself, mud, leaves, and animal hides, to stay alive long before real clothing appeared. From the heat of Africa to the icy winds of Europe and Asia, humans adapted not by growing thicker fur, but by getting smarter, working together, and reshaping the world around them. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? We love seeing your messages from every corner of the world. It reminds us how connected we all are, no matter when or where we live. And just one quick reminder, please subscribe to the channel and like this video, because if you relax too much and drift off before the end, you might forget to do it later. Your support helps us share more peaceful, fascinating journeys through history. You are the reason this channel exists. Without you, none of this would be possible. Now let's step into the ancient world, when humans walked the earth as a truly naked species and learned to survive anyway. The nakedness of humanity is often seen as something strange, even unnatural when compared to the animal kingdom. If you wander through a savanna today and look around at the creatures that roam there, lions with their tawny coats, zebras with their striped hides, antelope with their sleek fur, it seems that every animal wears its own natural garment. Only the human figure, in such a landscape, stands uncovered, the skin exposed to the shifting elements of sun, wind, and rain. Yet what appears to be vulnerability is, in truth, a carefully balanced adaptation that granted our species a unique place in nature. The naked human body, shining with sweat under the relentless heat, was a design not of weakness but of endurance. Endurance was the true battlefield of survival on the African plains. Unlike big cats that relied on sudden bursts of speed to bring down their prey, early humans pursued a different strategy known as persistence hunting. This was a slow but relentless chase, lasting not minutes but hours, sometimes even half a day. Antelopes, zebras, or wildebeests might sprint and escape a predator's claws, but they could not easily escape the tireless pursuit of humans who tracked them step by step. With each passing hour, the animal would grow hotter, panting heavily, its fur trapping heat against its body. Humans, however, with their bare skin and profusion of sweat glands, cooled efficiently with every step. Sweat carried away heat through evaporation, keeping the body's core temperature stable, even under punishing conditions. Eventually, the exhausted animal would collapse, unable to regulate its heat, while the humans, glistening with sweat, would move in for the kill. This remarkable strategy, made possible by our lack of fur, fed our ancestors and shaped our evolution as hunters. The human sweat gland is one of nature's quiet marvels. Most mammals sweat only sparingly, using panting as their main cooling method. Dogs, for instance, rely on their tongues to release heat, while many furry animals simply avoid the midday sun altogether. Humans, however, evolved an extraordinary density of eccrine sweat glands, millions scattered across nearly every surface of the skin. Each drop of sweat pulled heat from the body as it evaporated, creating a constant cooling system that required no conscious effort. This ability, combined with naked skin, gave humans unmatched stamina in the heat of day. The savannah was not just survived, it was conquered through the genius of sweating. And though sweat may seem ordinary today, it was once one of our greatest evolutionary tools, carrying the difference between life and death, between a failed hunt and a full belly. Yet hairlessness also carried deeper implications beyond the chase. The parasites of the ancient world were not merely annoyances, but serious threats. Ticks, fleas, and lice carried diseases that could devastate populations. In fur they found refuge, clinging close to the body where hands could not easily remove them. With the loss of body fur, Humans reduced these risks dramatically. Skin that was bare could be inspected, scratched, and cleared more easily. Early humans could groom one another, using fingernails or sharp stones to pluck parasites, and in doing so strengthen social bonds. Grooming became more than hygiene. It became intimacy, a way of saying, "I trust you enough to let you touch my skin." These small gestures, repeated countless times over generations, knitted together the fabric of human communities. Nakedness, far from being shameful, was the foundation of trust and connection in early society. Another layer to this story emerges when we consider the role of hairlessness in communication. Fur conceals the subtle play of muscles beneath the skin, while bare skin reveals emotion in a way that is immediately visible. A blush spreading across the cheeks, goosebumps rising on the arms, or sweat shining on the forehead. These are signals that could be read by others instantly. In a world where cooperation was survival, the ability to see and interpret these signs mattered. Humans became creatures of expression, their naked faces and bodies broadcasting emotions long before language took shape. Nakedness gave rise to visibility, and visibility fostered empathy. This transparency of the body became part of the glue that held early bands of humans together. But perhaps the most fascinating element of our hairless story lies in the way skin adapted to become a living shield. Melanin, the pigment that gives skin its color, is not just aesthetic, it is protection. In equatorial Africa, where the sun's rays strike most fiercely, melanin absorbed and dispersed ultraviolet radiation, preventing damage to DNA and protecting vital nutrients in the blood. Without this adaptation, exposed skin would have been a liability, leading to high rates of skin cancer and reproductive challenges. Instead, dark skin emerged as one of the earliest shields of survival. Later, as humans migrated into northern latitudes, where sunlight was weaker, the balance shifted. Lighter skin tones allowed more efficient production of vitamin D, critical for bone health and immune function. Thus, human nakedness was not a single uniform state, but a canvas that adapted, changing hue and tone to meet the demands of diverse environments. Each shade of skin tells a story of migration, adaptation, and resilience. Some scientists suggest that hairlessness may have played a role in sexual selection, a subtle force in evolution. Where other species flaunt elaborate fur, feathers, or antlers to attract mates, humans displayed skin itself. The smoothness, health, and tone of skin may have become signals of vitality and reproductive fitness. Mates who bore clear, unblemished skin would have been seen as healthier, less burdened by parasites or disease. Over generations, these preferences may have reinforced the tendency to hairlessness, shaping human bodies not only through survival but also through desire. The naked body became a canvas of beauty as well as endurance, entwining biology with attraction. Still, the question lingers. If nakedness was such an advantage, why do so few other animals share this trait? Whales and dolphins shed fur for a life in water, where sleek skin reduces drag. Elephants too have sparse hair, their massive size making heat regulation difficult under thick coats. But among primates, humans are unique. Our closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas, retain thick fur despite living in warm regions. The difference lies in our way of life. While apes foraged and rested in the shade of forests, humans stepped fully into the sun-drenched savannas. While apes fed on fruit within easy reach, humans pursued prey over long distances. Nakedness was a response to this boldness, this willingness to leave the safety of the trees and embrace the open plains. We became the ape of endurance, the ape of sweat, the ape of bare skin. This nakedness also set the stage for our dependence on other inventions. Fire, for example, became our blanket against the cold, a tool without which bare skin might not have endured in the cooler nights. Shelters provided walls where fur was absent. Social cooperation provided safety where claws and thick hides were lacking. Nakedness, then, was part of a grand exchange. By shedding fur, humans gained efficiency and heat, but took on new challenges that required ingenuity. This, in turn, spurred the growth of intelligence, creativity, and culture. Nakedness did not stand alone. It was part of a wider story of becoming human, a story where survival depended not only on the body but also on the mind. To imagine the ancient human walking across the grasslands, skin glistening in the heat, is to see a creature that embraced vulnerability and turned it into strength. They were naked, yes, but they were never defenseless. The earth provided what fur did not: caves, fire, companionship, and the ingenuity to transform challenges into opportunities. Nakedness was not the absence of something but the presence of adaptation, a decision written in flesh by the hand of evolution. It was the beginning of a long story in which humans learned to rely less on what nature gave them and more on what they could imagine, create, and share. The story of fur shedding becomes even more fascinating when you place humans side by side with our closest living relatives: chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. All retain their dense coats, and with them a lifestyle shaped by fur. They groom one another constantly, not only to remove parasites but also to maintain social order. A chimp's thick hair keeps it warm at night and shields it from insect bites during the day. Yet, when these animals move, they rarely travel far across open land, and when they do, it is often in short bursts. Their lives are centered in shaded forests where overheating is less of a concern, and so the balance tips in favor of fur. Humans, by contrast, chose the open spaces. Our ancestors became walkers and runners, explorers of vast plains, and the dense coat of our cousins simply could not have sustained such a way of life under the African sun. Scientists often look to physiology to explain why fur loss was such a turning point. One of the most striking differences between us and other primates is not the absence of hair follicles, but the extraordinary density of sweat glands. Each square inch of human skin contains hundreds of eccrine glands, capable of producing clear, watery sweat that evaporates quickly and efficiently cools the body. Other primates have far fewer, and their bodies are simply not designed for prolonged sweat. Instead, they rely on panting or resting in shade. The coupling of fur loss with the rise of eccrine sweating created a unique synergy in humans. It turned our entire skin into a living radiator, dissipating heat continuously as we moved. This was not just an adaptation, it was an invention crafted by evolution itself. But evolution rarely offers a gift without a price. As our fur receded, our skin grew vulnerable to the sun's ultraviolet radiation, which can damage DNA and cause cancers. To counter this, melanin production increased, creating a natural sunblock within our skin. The earliest humans were almost certainly dark-skinned, a necessity for survival under the equatorial sun. This adaptation preserved folate in the bloodstream, a nutrient critical for fetal development, while still protecting against DNA mutations. Later, as humans migrated into northern latitudes, where sunlight was scarce, lighter skin tones evolved to maximize vitamin D production. In this way, the trade-off of shedding fur created an ongoing cycle of adaptation, with skin color becoming a living reflection of geography, diet, and survival needs. Parasites provide another window into the story. The dense fur of other primates is a haven for lice, fleas, and ticks. These parasites feed on blood, weaken their hosts, and spread diseases. Bare skin, though more sensitive to bites, offered fewer hiding places and made removal easier. This likely reduced parasite loads significantly, giving humans a health advantage over their fur-covered cousins. Grooming among humans still took place, but it was a lighter task, focused more on building bonds than on constant parasite management. In fact, scientists studying lice have found that the timeline of fur loss is written in the DNA of these tiny creatures. The divergence of head lice from pubic lice, and later the emergence of body lice which require clothing to survive, gives us an evolutionary clock. These genetic markers suggest that humans shed their fur hundreds of thousands of years ago, long before they invented clothing, confirming that we truly lived as a naked species for much of our history. Yet with bare skin came new vulnerabilities. Especially in colder climates, fur insulates effortlessly. But humans, stripped of this natural layer, had to invent solutions. Fire became our first artificial fur, radiating warmth into the night. Animal hides, used initially as blankets or crude wrappings, became another answer. Caves and shelters offered protection from biting winds. What fur once gave, humans replaced with ingenuity. This was perhaps the greatest trade-off of all. By shedding fur, we pushed ourselves toward invention. Nakedness demanded creativity, and creativity became the seed of culture. There is also the matter of social interaction. Fur conceals the subtleties of the skin, but nakedness reveals them. the flush of embarrassment, the paleness of fear, the sheen of sweat. All these emotions and states became visible. This openness may have deepened empathy, as humans could read one another's bodies more clearly than other primates could. The naked face, especially, became a canvas of expression. Without fur to obscure it, every twitch of muscle, every smile or frown could be seen at once. This may have accelerated the development of social communication, paving the way for language and cooperation. Nakedness in this sense was not just biological, but psychological, reshaping how humans related to one another. The sexual dimension of this shift also cannot be ignored. In many primates, fur serves as a display, with colors or patterns signaling fertility or dominance. In humans, the loss of fur shifted emphasis onto the skin itself. Smoothness, tone, and health became signals of reproductive fitness. This likely played a role in mate selection, reinforcing the preference for hairlessness. Sexual selection, combined with natural pressures, helped to sculpt the modern human body. Even today, cultural ideals of beauty often emphasize the quality of skin, a legacy of this ancient shift. Interestingly, some parts of the body retained hair, and these remnants tell their own stories. The hair on our heads protects us from sun exposure, especially critical before hats or shelters. Eyebrows channel sweat away from the eyes, preserving vision in the heat. Eyelashes protect against dust and insects. Pubic and underarm hair likely evolved for pheromone signaling, aiding sexual attraction and partner recognition. In this way, fur was not lost entirely, but redistributed, retained where it served a purpose, shed where it hindered survival. The human body became a mosaic of hair and bare skin, a compromise crafted by countless generations. The endurance hunting hypothesis is perhaps the most vivid illustration of why fur loss mattered. Imagine a group of early humans on the savannah, tracking an antelope. The animal bolts, sprinting at incredible speed, leaving the humans far behind. But the humans do not stop. They jog steadily, mile after mile, under the relentless sun. The antelope pants heavily, unable to shed heat through its thick coat. Hours later, exhausted and overheated, it slows and collapses. The humans arrive, their bodies dripping with sweat, but still strong. They have not out-sprinted their prey, but they have outlasted it. This is the essence of the human body. Not speed, not strength, but endurance. And endurance was only possible because of bare skin and sweat. In the balance of evolution, every gain carries its shadow. The trade-offs of fur loss included exposure to cold, to injury, and to sunburn. But these challenges drove humans to develop tools, clothing, and fire. Nakedness forced us into a new relationship with the environment, one that required planning, cooperation, and innovation. In this sense, the shedding of fur was not just a biological change, but a cultural catalyst. It nudged humanity toward invention, shaping us into problem solvers who could thrive in every corner of the earth. When we think of the fur we lost, we should also think of what we gained. We gained the ability to cool our bodies under the sun, to run down prey, to reduce parasites, to display emotions, to strengthen bonds through touch, and to express beauty through skin. We gained flexibility, the capacity to survive in both heat and cold, with the help of culture. We gained visibility, both to ourselves and to one another. The shedding of fur was not simply subtraction, it was transformation. If you close your eyes and picture an early human standing on the savannah, the fur gone from their body, you might at first see fragility, but look closer, and you see something else. A creature adapted for endurance, for expression, for cooperation. You see skin glistening with sweat, cooling the body even as the sun beats down. You see a mind already beginning to solve problems, to use fire, to plan. You see a being who has made trade-offs, and through them, found new ways to survive. The naked skin is not a sign of weakness, but of evolution's quiet genius, a choice that shaped every step of our journey. The skin, though it may seem delicate to us today, was the first and most vital armor for our species. Long before threads were woven into cloth, before hides were stitched into garments, and even before humanity ventured into colder latitudes, skin stood as the sole barrier between a fragile body and the endless challenges of the earth. To imagine our ancestors, one must picture their skin not just as surface, but as a living shield, evolving over countless millennia to carry the weight of survival. It was not an accident of biology, but the product of countless trials, pressures, and natural selections that forged a human layer capable of withstanding fire, frost, and sun. To trace this story is to follow the silent dialogue between Earth and humanity, where climate and body conversed for 100,000 years, sculpting us into the naked yet resilient species we are today. When we compare ourselves to our primate cousins, we are struck by an oddity. The chimpanzee, gorilla, and orangutan wear a mantle of fur, while we stand bare in comparison. Yet beneath their hair, these primates have skin that looks remarkably similar to ours. The difference lies in exposure. Human skin had to adapt, once the body's fur diminished, to take on duties that fur had once managed. Protection from ultraviolet radiation, regulation of temperature, and resistance against parasites and abrasions all became the responsibility of this thin but mighty tissue. It was a trade-off of vulnerability for versatility, and evolution doubled down on refining its capabilities. In this nakedness lay both fragility and strength. Pigmentation tells one of the most fascinating chapters of this adaptation. Our ancestors in Africa lived beneath an unforgiving sun, where ultraviolet rays streamed down with relentless force. Ultraviolet light, if unchecked, damages DNA, burns flesh, and depletes folate, an essential nutrient for reproduction. For a species so finely tuned to reproduction and survival, protection was crucial. Skin gradually darkened, as natural selection favored individuals whose higher melanin content shielded them from this invisible yet lethal assault. Melanin, a simple pigment molecule, became one of our most important tools. It not only gave color, but absorbed and dissipated ultraviolet radiation, transforming harmful rays into harmless warmth. In doing so, it safeguarded both fertility and longevity. Dark skin in this way was a triumph of adaptation, a living shield carried within every cell. At the same time, this very adaptation created its own challenges when humans began to spread beyond Africa. In northern latitudes where sunlight was weaker, dark skin reduced the body's ability to synthesize vitamin D. Without enough of this nutrient, bones weakened and health faltered. Over generations, lighter skin tones evolved in some populations as a balancing act, reducing melanin to allow enough sunlight to penetrate and sustain vitamin D production. Thus, the very hues of humanity are records of journeys and compromises, carved not by preference but by environment. Every shade, from the deepest ebony to the palest ivory, is a survival story written into the skin of our ancestors. But skin was more than pigmentation. It was also the stage upon which temperature regulation unfolded. Humans are among the most remarkable thermoregulators in the animal kingdom, and much of this owes to an extraordinary abundance of sweat glands. Unlike most mammals, which pant or rely on shaded inactivity to cool, humans developed eccrine sweat glands distributed across nearly the entire body. This system allowed sweat to coat the skin and evaporate, drawing heat away with it. For ancestors roaming open savannas, chasing prey under the punishing sun, or foraging across vast distances, this ability to shed heat was life-saving. Where other predators faltered in the midday heat, humans endured, outlasting them through sheer persistence. The skin glistening with sweat was not a weakness but a weapon, giving rise to what anthropologists call persistence hunting, where humans could run animals to exhaustion simply by never overheating. Yet skin also faced the cold. Nakedness was an advantage in heat, but a vulnerability in chill. The human body adapted with subtle tools. Blood vessels in the skin could constrict, conserving heat for the core, or dilate to release warmth. Tiny muscles at the base of hairs, though largely vestigial now, once raised finer body hairs to create slight insulation. In colder environments, skin's barrier function became critical, preventing dehydration, frostbite, and injury from rough terrain. What clothing would later accomplish, skin first attempted, and often succeeded by constantly adjusting itself to keep the fragile balance of inner warmth against outer cold. This adaptability was never perfect, but it was remarkable enough to allow humans to wander from tropical Africa into temperate and even subarctic zones long before tailored garments were invented. The toughness of human skin also played its role. Barefoot journeys across sharp stones, brambles, and hot sands were made possible by thickened calluses that formed wherever repeated stress occurred. Hands hardened with labor, shoulders toughened under the sun, and feet armored themselves naturally through layers of keratin. Unlike leather or cloth, these shields were self-repairing. A cut or abrasion signaled the skin to begin its quiet work of healing, drawing cells together, building scar tissue if needed, and restoring continuity. Every mark, every scar was both memory and adaptation, telling a tale of challenges met and endured. In a very real sense, skin was our first healer, able to repair itself without tools, without potions, without clothing. Even parasites and infections, though constant threats, shaped this survival armor. The outermost layer of skin, the stratum corneum, formed a nearly impenetrable wall of dead, keratinized cells. Beneath it, oils secreted by sebaceous glands created a slightly acidic environment, hostile to bacteria. This acid mantle, though unnoticed, was another gift of evolution, an invisible film that helped keep harmful microbes at. Without fur, fewer parasites could cling to our bodies, reducing infestations that plagued hairier species. Naked skin, paradoxically, was cleaner skin, allowing easier detection and removal of ticks, lice and fleas. Thus what might seem like exposure was in fact protection, a calculated trade by evolution in favor of long-term survival. Sun and cold were not the only pressures. Skin also had to endure the abrasions of daily life. Climbing trees, gathering plants, squatting on rough ground, all placed demands on resilience. Children scraped knees on rocks, adults blistered their palms with tools, hunters tore flesh on thorns. Yet time and again, skin endured, thickened, and regenerated. Its ability to renew itself every month meant that it was never static, never permanently damaged. Like the Earth's surface, constantly remade by wind and water, skin was an ever-renewing frontier, always growing back to face the world again. This regenerative quality was vital to a species that lived rough, without shelter, without clothes, exposed to the raw edges of nature. The skin also carried stories beyond protection. Its appearance was communication. The flush of blood beneath the surface revealed embarrassment, anger, attraction or shame, broadcasting emotions in ways no fur-covered face could. This transparency may have fostered deeper social bonds, allowing humans to read one another's feelings and intentions. Sweating, too, had its signals, carrying scents that conveyed stress, fertility, or illness to others. Skin was thus a medium of both survival and society, a surface where biology and behavior intertwined. To live in a naked species was to live visible, both to the environment and to one another. Over thousands of years, the dialogue between skin and world continued. As climates shifted, as humans wandered further, skin remained the frontier of adaptation. Every pore, every gland, every shade of melanin was a whisper of resilience. Imagine our ancestors gathering by the fire, their skin glowing in its light, is to imagine bodies that had endured countless days of heat, countless nights of cold, and countless dangers, armed only with the quiet genius of their own biology. Clothing would come later, tools of fur and fiber, adding layers of protection, but beneath them, the skin would remain, still doing its work, still carrying the ancient burden of survival. Even today, in a world of fabrics and shelters, we are creatures of skin. It sweats when we run, it burns when we forget the sun, it chills when winter bites. It is not simply surface, but history. For more than 100,000 years, it was our sole shield, and even now, wrapped in modern inventions, our skin remembers what it was forged to do, to hold us safe against the vast indifferent world, to bridge the fragile warmth of the body with the boundless challenges of Earth. In the beginning, when humans first learned to bend the wild flame to their will, it was less a tool than a miracle, a glowing phenomenon that seemed born from the heavens, or torn from the earth itself. Before fire, night brought with it a heavy cloak of darkness that pressed down on early humans, filling the world with unseen threats and chilling winds. The first spark, whether from a lightning strike on a dry tree or from stones clashing together, must have seemed like a fragment of the sun itself fallen to the earth. In that glow, shadows danced, warmth seeped into the skin, and for the first time in countless generations, humans felt that they could push back the cold and claim a small circle of safety in an otherwise hostile world. As our ancestors gathered around these flames, their relationship with fire deepened into one of trust and reverence. It became more than just light and heat. It became the very heart of community. Without clothes to shield them from the biting chill of night, fire became a living blanket, wrapping bodies in invisible warmth that seemed to seep into bones. For those who shivered in caves and open plains, it meant the difference between life and death. The skin, exposed and vulnerable, suddenly had an ally, a partner that could defend it against the relentless cold. Fire gave a fragile species a weapon more powerful than fangs or claws. With it they could sleep more peacefully, dream more freely, and rest with less fear of the night stealing them away. The flames also offered protection that clothing could never have provided at that time. Wild animals who might have once prowled close in the darkness now lingered at a distance, wary of the mysterious flickering light. The glowing embers were like sentinels standing guard, scaring away predators that had once held the upper hand. Lions, leopards, and hyenas, whose eyes gleamed in the night, knew instinctively to avoid the strange fire-lit gatherings of humans. This newfound security gave our ancestors something precious: time to sit together, to share food, to whisper or hum, to stare into the coals and think. Fire gave humans their first chance to create culture, to nurture bonds, and to begin the slow journey toward becoming something more than mere survivors. But it was warmth that mattered most. In regions where nights grew icy, even within warmer latitudes, early humans without clothing had little to shield them once the sun dipped below the horizon. The crackle and heat of fire became an equalizer, allowing naked bodies to endure conditions they would otherwise never withstand. The skin could rest in its exposed state, no longer bracing endlessly against the cold winds. Fires were carefully tended through the night, sometimes kept burning for days, for to let it die meant vulnerability returning with the darkness. Children huddled close, elders leaned toward the flames, and even the strongest hunters drew comfort from its steady warmth. It was humanity's first hearth, an invisible fabric of heat woven around them like a garment. As generations passed, the mastery of fire grew more precise. At first, humans carried burning sticks from natural blazes, carefully preserving them until they could ignite dried grass or wood again. Eventually, sparks could be coaxed from stones, embers could be fanned into flame, and fire could be born by human hands rather than borrowed from nature. This ability transformed existence. No longer dependent on chance encounters with lightning or wildfire, they could summon warmth whenever it was needed. The invisible blanket was no longer a rare gift. It became a constant presence, as essential as water and food. To sit before the flames became a nightly ritual, one that bound groups together in ways that would shape language, memory, and myth. Fire also softened the world in other ways. Raw meat, once torn from bone and chewed with difficulty, could now be roasted, making it tender and easier to digest. This not only saved energy, but also unleashed nutrients in ways the body could absorb more efficiently, fueling the growth of the brain. As food became easier to chew and process, the shape of jaws and teeth changed, and the body could redirect energy toward thought and endurance. Fire, then, was not simply a blanket against the cold, it was a hidden architect of the human body and mind. It nurtured skin, bones, and brains, shaping evolution as subtly as any physical trait. Around fire, social life also bloomed. In daylight, survival demanded movement, hunting, foraging, watching for danger. But when darkness fell and fire held back the chill, humans gathered in ways no other creature did. In that circle of light, stories may have first been spoken, gestures turned into language, and ideas were shared and passed on. The flames were mirrors of memory, places where imagination was sparked as vividly as dry grass catching embers. Laughter, grief, hope, and fear could all be voiced under fire's gaze. While clothing would one day offer warmth to individuals, fire offered warmth to the collective, creating not just comfort but connection. Even the smoke had its uses. Insects that plagued bare skin, biting relentlessly, and carrying disease, were driven away by the haze that drifted from burning wood. Fire became a shield against pests as much as against the cold. Its glow illuminated hidden dangers on the ground. The embers repelled creeping creatures, and the heat kept dampness at bay. Early humans likely learned to position themselves so that smoke brushed lightly over their bodies, a natural defense in a world where every bite or sting could mean illness. In colder migrations, when humans ventured beyond the warmth of the tropics, fire became indispensable. Without clothes, they could not have stepped into harsh environments, but with fire they carried the sun with them. Bundled together near flames, they extended their reach into lands no naked ape should have endured. Their skin alone could not protect them, but fire filled the gaps, a flexible, portable shield that adapted wherever they went. Each fire was a reminder that they were not entirely at the mercy of nature anymore. They had found a way to shape it. What must it have felt like to sit by that first tamed fire? To see sparks drift upward, mimicking the stars, to feel warmth pulsing through a body that had always known the raw bite of coal. Perhaps they whispered thanks, or perhaps they simply gazed in awe, sensing that they had stumbled upon something bigger than themselves. For the first time they had a power that no other creature on earth wielded, and in its glow they became something new, naked still, vulnerable still, but wrapped in an unseen garment of heat and light. They were no longer just surviving, they were beginning to thrive. Beneath the vast and shifting skies of the prehistoric world, the earth itself offered havens for the fragile human body. Without clothes to soften the bite of the cold winds or to shield from rain and snow, early people turned instinctively to the contours of the land, seeking in stone, soil, and wood the comfort that their bare skin could not provide. A cave mouth, dark and mysterious, might have seemed at first like the lair of beasts, but with courage and firelight it transformed into a refuge. Rock overhangs, hollow trees, and the hollows left by eroded hillsides were all invitations from nature, waiting to be claimed by a species determined to endure. These shelters were not only walls against the weather, but became extensions of the human body itself, protective skins made of earth and stone. The world 100,000 years ago was restless and wild. Storms lashed with little warning. Temperatures swung from blistering heat to freezing cold, and predators prowled both night and day. To survive without clothing meant to embrace resourcefulness, and caves and natural hideouts offered more than protection from the elements. They also muted the ever-present fear of exposure. A cave was cool during scorching summers, and retained a surprising warmth in winter, its stone walls holding onto the faint heat of fire. In these dark chambers, small groups huddled together, and with the crackling of flames casting moving shadows, they created a sense of security in a world that otherwise offered none. The stone arch above their heads became a shield, a womb-like space where the fragile human body could rest. Some caves stretched deep into the earth, winding like veins through mountains. These provided layers of defense against wind and predators, but they also posed dangers of their own. Darkness beyond the firelight was absolute, and strange sounds echoed in the distance, sometimes no more than dripping water, sometimes the growl of another creature that had also sought safety in the cavern. The early humans learned to read these sounds, to choose wisely which shelters they could claim and which they must abandon. A balance had to be struck. A cave that was too deep risked suffocation and unseen threats, while one too shallow left them vulnerable to the bite of the wind and prying eyes of predators. Through experience, they grew adept at recognizing which places gave comfort and which concealed danger. Overhangs of stone were another kind of gift. Along cliffsides and river valleys, immense slabs jutted outward like natural roofs. Beneath these, families could gather and stay dry while the rains poured in silver curtains beyond the stone lip. Unlike the enclosed darkness of caves, overhangs allowed a connection to the outside world while still providing shelter. They could watch storms pass, hear the rush of rivers, and scan for approaching animals. At night, the fire would glow against the stone ceiling, turning the overhang into a glowing beacon. Here, early humans began to leave traces of themselves, scorched stone from countless fires, discarded bones, and eventually, markings that would whisper their presence across the ages. Such shelters were not just temporary pauses against the weather, but became the backdrop for the first stirrings of community. The ingenuity of our ancestors extended beyond what nature provided whole. They shaped makeshift shelters, weaving branches together, piling leaves for insulation, and stretching animal hides across wooden frames. Before sewing and fitted clothing, these structures were the closest thing to wrapping the body in protection. A hollow tree might be widened with stone tools, its interior scraped smooth to cradle a sleeping family. Shallow pits dug into the earth, covered with sticks and foliage, became warm nests, insulated against the cold by the very ground itself. These acts of construction represented a profound step. Humans were no longer merely accepting nature's gifts, but beginning to shape the environment to fit their needs, a foreshadowing of the civilizations to come. In regions where winters grew especially bitter, the need for shelter became life or death. The naked human form could not endure long against icy winds and heavy snow. Groups survived by clustering in caves warmed by fire and bodies pressed together, but they also innovated, layering furs and leaves atop the stone floor to create barriers against the cold ground. In such places, the cave was not merely protection but a crucible of survival, where only those who could master fire, resourcefulness, and cooperation endured. The cave mouth in winter glowed with smoke, a signal that inside, humanity's fragile flame of life was refusing to be extinguished. Beyond warmth, these shelters carried symbolic weight. The stone ceiling overhead was a constant reminder of safety, and generation after generation returned to the same places. Children were born under the same arches where their ancestors had slept, and fires were kindled in hearths, darkened by the smoke of centuries. These places became the first human homes, where memory and survival intertwined. Long before villages and cities rose, these hollows in the earth and openings in cliffs were the roots of belonging, and in their embrace, humanity endured its most vulnerable state. Even in warmer climates, where survival without clothing was less punishing, shelters provided relief from the relentless sun and protection from sudden storms. Shade beneath rock outcrops or thickets of trees kept the skin from burning and gave weary travelers a chance to recover. In these regions, the challenge was not cold but heat and predators. Yet again, natural hideouts proved essential. The quiet of a cave at midday offered coolness and rest, just as the fiery glow at night offered safety. Across environments, from savannas to tundra, the lesson was the same. Without the second skin of clothes, the earth itself became the clothing, wrapping humanity in stone, wood and shadow. What began as instinctive choices of where to sleep and hide slowly became traditions and teachings passed down through generations. A child learned from elders how to recognize a safe shelter, how to place stones so that smoke would escape without smothering, how to choose dry places where rain would not seep in. These lessons were survival itself, transmitted not through writing, but through lived experience, etched into memory by necessity. The world was harsh, but humans adapted not only with their bodies, but with their minds, learning to use the land's shapes as extensions of their own resilience. Over tens of thousands of years, these shelters did more than protect. They shaped the rhythm of human life, creating spaces where groups could gather, share food, and tell stories. The walls of caves would one day become canvases for art, but even before pigments touched stone, the fireside gatherings etched something into the minds of those who sat there, a sense of community, a recognition that survival was not an individual act, but a collective one. In the womb of the earth, surrounded by stone and flame, humanity not only survived without clothes, it thrived, growing roots that would one day spread across the entire planet. In the story of humankind, there came a time when our ancestors began to wander far beyond the warm, forgiving savannas of Africa. Driven by curiosity, necessity, or perhaps the slow rhythm of following herds and shifting climates, they walked into lands where the air grew sharp and unforgiving. These places offered food, water, and open space, but they also brought with them the cold, a force invisible yet powerful, capable of sapping strength, numbing limbs and threatening survival. And yet, humans endured, long before the comfort of woven clothes or the tailoring of hides, armed only with their ingenuity, their bodies and each other. To understand how they survived in such conditions is to look closely at the remarkable interplay of biology, behavior, and cooperation that defined our species. One of the first defenses against the cold was already present within the human body itself. Unlike most primates who remained bound to warmer environments, humans had begun to develop traits that allowed them to better handle fluctuations in temperature. The layer of fat beneath our skin, modest though it may seem compared to marine mammals, offered insulation in a way fur never could. This fat was especially useful for conserving heat when nights turned freezing or when the wind swept across open plains. Fat is not just a store of energy, it is a blanket, a shield, an evolutionary compromise that, when combined with a high-calorie diet from hunting and foraging, gave our ancestors the reserves they needed to endure extended bouts of cold. In times when food was plentiful, the body stored energy not just for fuel but for warmth, ensuring survival in leaner, harsher days. But fat alone could not keep the cold at bay. The human body developed another weapon, the ability to generate and hold on to heat more effectively through shivering and metabolic changes. Shivering is not simply an inconvenience. It is an ancient mechanism, tiny muscle contractions producing warmth that spreads throughout the body. In colder climates, those who could increase metabolic activity, burning calories more quickly, had an advantage. They turned food into heat, an invisible fire inside the body that mirrored the flames they would one day gather around. This inner adaptability, subtle but powerful, meant that even without clothing, humans were not entirely defenseless. They had biology on their side, a system fine-tuned over millennia to manage the push and pull between conserving energy and generating warmth. Of course, biology was only part of the story. The real genius of humanity lay in its resourcefulness. Cold was not just endured, it was met with clever strategies that transformed the environment itself into a kind of clothing. Humans sought shelter where the land offered it. In cliffs and valleys, they found caves that held steady warmth, protecting against icy winds and sudden snow. Rock overhangs became havens, and when nature provided nothing, humans built from branches, leaves and earth. These makeshift shelters were not grand, but they were effective. By blocking the wind, trapping the warmth of bodies, and concentrating the heat of fire, such dwellings allowed groups to withstand conditions that would have killed a lone wanderer. The earth itself became an ally, wrapping around the human form as walls, roofs and windbreak. Yet perhaps the greatest protection against the cold was not fire or shelter, but each other. Humans learned early on the value of gathering close, of sharing body heat, of huddling together through the night. A single body may lose heat quickly, but a cluster of bodies, pressed close, can create a small ecosystem of warmth. Anthropologists have often noted that this behavior, simple as it seems, would have been crucial in Ice Age nights or sudden cold snaps. Children survived because parents held them. The weak endured because the strong shared their warmth. The cold in this way did more than test survival. It bound people closer together, deepening the sense of community that became the hallmark of our species. Survival was not a solitary achievement, but a collective act, where cooperation meant life. In the face of colder environments, humans also began to refine their diets and hunting practices. Cold demanded more energy, and so diets richer in fat and protein became essential. The meat of large animals, especially those layered with fat and marrow, offered not just calories, but warmth in the form of fuel for the body's inner fire. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans prized bones, cracking them open to reach the fatty marrow inside. Such practices were not wasteful scavenging, but strategic survival. By consuming the densest sources of energy, humans could sustain the higher metabolism that cold demanded. Even plants, roots and nuts played their part, providing steady fuel in times when game was scarce. Eating was survival, and eating well enough to keep the body burning hot was the line between life and death. Another strategy was timing and movement. Humans learned the rhythms of the land, moving with the seasons to avoid the most brutal cold. In colder regions, they may have used migration not just to follow prey but to escape winter's harshest grip. Where permanent escape was not possible, they found ways to endure, slowing activity, conserving energy, and retreating into shelters during the worst conditions. The cold demanded respect and patience, and humans gave it both, adapting their behavior to its cycles in a dance that was as much about timing as it was about endurance. In time, fire, that most miraculous of tools, became more than just light and protection. It was warmth itself, a sun brought to earth. With fire, Humans could venture further into cold climates than their bodies alone would have allowed. Nights became survivable, caves glowed with comfort, and food could be cooked, releasing even more energy to fuel the body's furnace. Fire meant that the cold was no longer an impenetrable barrier, but a challenge to be managed. It was not clothing yet, but it was a kind of invisible garment, one that wrapped a group in waves of heat and pushed back against the winter air. Around the flames, stories may have been told, songs may have been sung, and bonds deepened, not just to keep warm, but to remember why they endured. Still, the cold remained a formidable adversary, and humans bore its marks. Skin tingled with frost, fingers stiffened, and breath hung in the air as mist. Those who survived learned resilience, passing on knowledge of which plants could help stave off sickness, which shelters trapped heat best, and how to coax life back into a fire gone cold. Over generations, these lessons became part of human memory, a shared inheritance as vital as tools or language. The cold tested the boundaries of human creativity and, in doing so, drew forth innovation after innovation. Without it, perhaps we would not have discovered the full extent of our adaptability. And so, even without clothing, humans spread across continents, meeting the chill of new lands with a blend of biology, community, and ingenuity. Fat layered beneath the skin, bodies shivering and burning fuel, fires flickering in caves, shelters built with patient hands, and groups huddling together against the night. These were the tools that allowed us to step into worlds our primate cousins could never have reached. The cold was not just endured, it was conquered, slowly, step by step, in ways both simple and profound. When night fell upon the ancient world, the darkness was more than the absence of light, it was a force that pressed down on the mind, filled with the unseen dangers of predators and the unrelenting bite of cold air. For early humans, stripped of clothing and without the insulation that fur had given their ancestors, this nightly descent into chill and shadow could have been a death sentence. Yet it was not. Instead, they discovered that survival could be drawn from the simplest and most profound source, each other. The body of one was fragile against the cold, but the bodies of many, gathered together, could generate and preserve enough warmth to withstand nights that otherwise would have been unbearable. It is here that we see the roots of one of the most remarkable aspects of humanity, not our tools or our weapons, but our instinct to live socially, to draw close, to survive as groups. Long before clothing, long before shelter was perfected, long before agriculture or writing, early humans discovered the vital truth that warmth, both physical and emotional, comes from togetherness. Around the embers of a fire, under the rocky ceilings of caves, in the clustered huddles of families and kin, the cold was transformed into something survivable. Imagine a small band of humans tens of thousands of years ago. The day has ended, and the night is growing colder. They have built a fire, but the flames only stretch so far, casting warmth outward in a circle that leaves shadows stretching behind them. Beyond that circle lies the unknown, the rustle of predators, the chill of open land, the emptiness of night. Within the circle, though, bodies press close. Adults sit shoulder to shoulder, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around one another. Infants are cradled against warm skin, toddlers held tight, the elderly nestled in the middle, protected and warmed by the younger and stronger. Heat passes from one body to another in a chain that links them together. They do not think of it as strategy. It is simply what they do, the natural rhythm of survival. And in that rhythm, more than warmth is shared. Early humans began to bond through these nightly gatherings. Physical closeness nurtured emotional closeness. The gestures of reassurance, a hand stroked across a child's hair, a comforting murmur in the dark, a protective arm curled around another's body, carried weight beyond their immediate purpose. They wove the first strands of social fabric, strands that would grow into the complex networks of empathy, trust, and cooperation that define humanity today. To survive the cold, they had to stay close. To stay close, they had to cooperate. And through cooperation, they became more than individuals. They became communities. The fire was their anchor. Without clothing to trap warmth, it was the blaze that made huddling effective. Its flames offered more than heat. They offered safety, keeping predators wary and providing light to reassure against the void of night. But fire was also limited. demanding fuel and tending. One person could not keep a fire alive alone. It took many hands to gather wood, many watchful eyes to ensure the flames did not die, many hearts to share in the labor and its reward. This need for cooperation was essential. If the group failed, if the fire died, cold and danger would creep in at once. It was not possible to survive in isolation, not in the long term. Early humans who lived closely, who shared fire and huddled together, thrived where solitary individuals could not. Over time, this nightly ritual of gathering became the heartbeat of community life. Around the flames, warmth drew people inwards, and with it came the beginnings of storytelling. As sparks rose to the sky, early humans whispered to one another, practicing the art of communication, shaping sounds into meaning. Fire and huddling did more than preserve warmth. They cultivated language, culture, and memory. Survival through social warmth left an indelible imprint on our evolution. It was not just skin against skin that sustained us, but thought against thought, story against story, the passing of knowledge in the glow of shared light. The harshness of cold climates only deepened this reliance on one another. As groups pushed into regions where icy winds scoured the earth and snow covered the land, the margin for survival grew thinner. In these conditions, the value of cooperation was magnified. They learned to cluster more tightly, to build windbreaks with their bodies, to use animal skins, not yet as stitched clothing, but as shared coverings under which several might press together. These gestures were not luxuries, they were necessity. The weak could not endure the cold alone, but in the center of a group huddle, they had a chance. And in protecting their vulnerable, the group protected its future. Anthropologists studying human evolution have long recognized this truth. Our survival in such climates was not simply due to ingenuity or adaptation of the body, but to the evolution of social bonds. Other animals huddle for warmth, penguins in polar regions, for example, but humans took this instinct further, weaving it into the fabric of culture. We did not merely huddle as bodies seeking heat, we huddled as families, as tribes, as beings capable of trust, of shared labor, of empathy. That instinct became one of the strongest forces in human history, one that echoes through time into the way we live today. Even in modern life, the ancient habit remains. We still gather around fires, whether in hearths or around campfires, drawn to their warmth and companionship. We still find comfort in shared closeness, in hugs, in embraces, in sleeping side by side. We seek the reassurance of others on cold nights, not because we cannot survive alone anymore, but because deep within us lingers the memory of a time when survival truly depended on such togetherness. What once kept our ancestors alive still keeps us connected. For early humans, surviving without clothes was not merely a feat of the body, but a triumph of the collective spirit. Their warmth was more than temperature. It was belonging, trust, and unity. Against the icy nights of the past, they found not just survival, but the roots of what it means to be human, to share, to protect, to endure together. Before clothing was ever stitched together, before needles pierced hides or fibers were woven into fabric, early humans relied on what the natural world offered them directly. The earth itself provided their first coverings, not in the form of garments as we imagine them today, but as improvisations that softened the edge of the elements. The cold winds, scorching sun, and sudden rains all demanded a response, and our ancestors, with no tools beyond their hands and minds, began to experiment with the simplest protections nature placed within reach. It was not yet clothing in the true sense. It was adaptation through direct contact with mud, leaves, bark, and the hides of animals. A first whisper of humanity's long partnership with the materials of the earth. Mud was perhaps one of the earliest and most universal of these improvisations. Across hot savannas or open grasslands, the sun bore down relentlessly, baking skin and leaving it vulnerable to burns and biting insects. By smearing mud across their bodies, early humans discovered an immediate layer of relief. The mud cooled the skin, absorbed sweat, and dulled the sting of insect bites. In colder environments, a thick coating of clay-like earth acted as a crude insulator, trapping warmth beneath its layers much as modern athletes might use thermal gels. The sight of humans, their skin covered in patterns of ochre or streaks of dark clay, may have been as much about comfort and protection as it was about expression. Over time, this practical act of smearing mud began to intertwine with symbolism, giving rise to body painting and decoration. But at its root it was survival, a way of shielding bare skin from a world that pressed against it with harsh extremes. Leaves, grasses, and bark were another set of materials that early humans reached for instinctively. To lie upon the cold ground was to risk losing body heat rapidly, so bedding made of dry leaves or grasses became a simple but vital buffer. When tucked around the body, these same plants provided insulation, much like crude blankets. Anthropologists have found evidence of early bedding layers in caves, where traces of compacted grasses reveal how humans shaped sleeping mats long before weaving was invented. On the body, large leaves could be pressed against the skin or fastened with vines, serving as a shield against rain or sun. Bark peeled from trees offered stiff but useful coverings, wrapped loosely around shoulders or used to guard sensitive parts of the body during rough travel. These were not yet clothes tailored to fit, but temporary solutions born of necessity. Fleeting layers of the forest itself. Animal skins marked another turning point in this improvisational journey. Before sewing was discovered, hides were likely used in their rawest form. After a successful hunt, the skin of an animal was not just meat wasted but an opportunity. Draped across shoulders, laid over sleeping bodies, or shared by small groups huddling together, animal hides gave warmth that no mud or leaves could provide. They carried the insulating power of fur, trapping air and retaining heat. Even without stitching, skins could be tied loosely with strips of sinew or vines, forming primitive cloaks or coverings. Archaeological evidence suggests that this use of hides dates back hundreds of thousands of years, long before Homo sapiens refined sewing. The very act of pulling a hide over the body was the first step toward clothing as we understand. But these early improvisations were not merely about physical comfort. They were acts of ingenuity that deepened humanity's bond with the natural world. In mud, they found a connection to the earth. In leaves and grasses, to the forest and savanna. In animal hides, to the creatures they hunted and relied upon. Each improvisation carried both a practical lesson and a symbolic one. Mud cooling the body may also have left patterns on skin that became early marks of identity. Leaves woven into hair may have offered both protection from insects and a way of signaling beauty or strength. The hides of animals worn loosely across the body could carry the scent and spirit of the hunt, reminding the wearer of both danger and triumph. Survival and meaning wove together even at this most basic level of protection. In regions where winters grew harsh, early humans likely discovered natural insulation through layering plant matter. Bundles of grasses tucked under hides increased warmth, while moss could be stuffed between coverings to fill gaps where cold crept in. Observing animals was an important guide, just as birds lined their nests with soft feathers or moss. Humans mimicked this behavior, padding their sleeping areas or tucking these materials against their own skin. The lessons of nature were everywhere, waiting to be borrowed. Watching a bear roll in mud, or a herd of animals sheltering under thick brush, may have given rise to ideas that humans adapted into their own survival strategies. Even water was sometimes turned into a protective ally. In the blazing sun, wet clay smeared across the body cooled and delayed dehydration, while in colder climates, snow rubbed across the skin could be used briefly to numb pain or reduce swelling. It was an intimate relationship with the environment, one in which every element of the landscape was tested for its usefulness. The human body was not yet shielded by crafted garments but by nature itself, applied directly and creatively. These improvisations also carried with them a kind of storytelling, a shared knowledge passed from one generation to another. Children learned by watching their elders smear mud before setting out into the sun, or by helping to gather grasses to layer beneath sleeping skins. Each act carried memory and wisdom, shaping traditions long before language was written down. In this way, survival knowledge became cultural knowledge, carried through small acts repeated across countless days and nights. The transition from these natural improvisations to true clothing was gradual, but the seeds of invention were planted here, A strip of hide tied with sinew hinted at the sewing that would one day follow. Leaves pressed against the body foreshadowed the weaving of fibers into fabric. Mud painted on skin not only shielded from insects but prepared the mind for the idea that the human body could be shaped, decorated, and transformed by coverings. In every improvised solution lay a glimpse of the future, where clothing would become one of humanity's defining achievements. Yet there was also something profound in these earliest coverings that modern clothing has since concealed. When humans wore mud, leaves, or hides in their raw forms, they were directly connected to their environment in ways we rarely experience now. The earth clung to their skin, the forest lay against their shoulders, the scent of animals warmed their nights. They carried the world with them, not as an artifact transformed by human hands, but as it was given untamed, imperfect, and real. It was a closeness to nature that anchored their survival and shaped their imagination. The story of clothing begins not with thread and needle but with these primal experiments. Each lump of mud, each leaf pressed against the body, each skin draped across bare shoulders, was a step in humanity's great unfolding journey of adaptation. It is easy to overlook these improvisations as crude, but they were not crude at all. They were genius born from necessity, acts of creativity, as vital as any invention that followed. They speak to the resilience of our ancestors, who, with no woven fabric, no tailored garment, found in the raw offerings of earth, forest, and animal the tools to endure. And so, long before the hum of looms or the whisper of sewing needles, humans lived wrapped in the textures of the world itself. The earth was their first tailor, providing mud, leaf, and hide. And in learning to use these gifts, humanity began a story of protection, identity, and survival that continues to this day. For countless generations, our ancestors lived as a naked species, wrapped only in their own skin, their wits and the gifts of the land around them. But there came a moment in the story of humanity when something shifted, when the balance tipped from improvisations of mud, leaves, and animal hides toward a more deliberate kind of protection, when true clothing began to appear. This turning point is one of the quiet yet revolutionary chapters of our survival, a change that may not have seemed dramatic at first glance but altered the way humans interacted with the world forever. Unlike fire, which roared and flickered in the night sky, or stone tools that left sharp-edged evidence for archaeologists to find, clothing was softer, perishable, fleeting. Its traces seldom linger in the soil. Yet the clues are there, scattered across time, whispering from the genes of lice, the shapes of needles carved from bone, and the faint residues of fibers preserved in ancient sediments. The story begins not in a cave filled with garments, but in the genome of a parasite. Humans, like all mammals, have lice. Today we live with three kinds: head lice, body lice, and pubic lice. Head lice cling to hair on the scalp. Pubic lice are a legacy of a distant encounter with gorillas, but body lice are different. They do not live in our hair at all. Instead, they nestle and breed in the fibers of clothing. Their very existence depends on garments, meaning they could not have evolved until humans had begun to regularly wear clothes. Genetic studies of body lice suggest they split from head lice somewhere between 170,000 and 70,000 years ago, most likely around 100,000 years ago. That timeline becomes a shadowy marker. Somewhere in those millennia, humans went from occasionally wrapping themselves in skins to making clothing a permanent part of their lives. Archaeological evidence supports this genetic whisper. In cold European caves, tools made of bone and ivory appear around 40,000 years ago, and among them are delicate items with eyes pierced through their tips, bone needles. These are not tools for butchering or carving. They are the earliest sewing needles designed for stitching hides together into tailored clothing. Their appearance tells us that by then, humans had moved far beyond draping skins over their shoulders. They had learned to cut, pierce, and stitch, transforming the rough hides of animals into fitted garments that clung close to the body, sealed out drafts, and allowed people to move freely even in icy winds. To make such garments required foresight and skill, scraping the hides clean, softening the leather with fat, punching holes and threading sinew through them. These steps reveal not just ingenuity but patience, a slow and careful craft handed from one generation to the next. Still, the timeline of clothing does not match neatly with the presence of bone needles. After all, humans survived in colder climates like Ice Age Europe, tens of thousands of years before the first needles appear. This suggests that earlier clothing existed, but in simpler, cruder forms. Perhaps it was little more than draped hides tied with thongs or bark fibers wrapped around the waist. These garments left no trace behind, for hides rot quickly in damp soil and plant fibers crumble into dust. Yet the need for them must have grown pressing as humans left the warm cradle of Africa and entered lands where frost rimed the trees and snow blanketed the ground. The very survival of humans in these environments suggests that clothing of some kind was already in use, even if it was rudimentary. The turning point, then, was not a single invention but a gradual weaving of necessity, opportunity, and innovation. As the climate fluctuated during the ice ages, with glaciers advancing and retreating, humans were forced to adapt repeatedly. When the cold pressed in, those without clothes perished, while those with the ingenuity to wrap themselves in skins endured. Over time, clothing ceased to be a luxury or occasional aid. It became a fundamental part of human existence. It was no longer about improvisation, but about deliberate creation. The difference was profound, for with clothes, humans became a species that could settle anywhere, from the equatorial plains to the windswept tundra. The archaeological record gives us glimpses of this growing relationship between humans and garments. In Dudzawana Cave in Georgia, fibers of flax dating to nearly 30,000 years ago were discovered, some twisted and knotted as if spun into thread. Flax is a plant that later civilizations would cultivate for linen, but here it was used long before farming, a clear sign that people were experimenting with weaving and cord making. These fibers suggest garments of woven plant material, softer and lighter than hides, perhaps used for warmer seasons or as underlayers beneath leather cloaks. They also hint at an expanding imagination. Clothes were not only for warmth but for adornment, expression, and identity. The emergence of clothing also altered human society in subtle ways. Clothes could be shared, gifted, or decorated, strengthening bonds within a group. They may have carried marks of status or skill, with the most carefully sewn hides belonging to respected hunters or leaders. The art of making garments required cooperation between hunters who supplied the hides and craftspeople who prepared and stitched them. This division of labor deepened social connections, weaving together not just fibers, but communities. Clothing became part of human culture, as much as part of human biology. The DNA of lice tells us when clothing became a necessity, but the stories of survival tell us why it mattered so deeply. As humans ventured north, they faced winds that could strip the breath from their lungs, and night seas. Fire alone was not enough. A skin draped over the shoulders became a barrier against frostbite. A cloak tied snugly at the chest became the difference between life and death. Children swaddled in hides survived the winter where bare ones would not. With clothing, humans gained the freedom to explore, to settle, and to dream beyond the boundaries of climate. Even more fascinating is how this turning point reshaped our relationship with our own body. For millions of years, our ancestors had relied solely on skin and hair to mediate between them and the environment. But with clothing, skin was no longer the only line of defense. Humans began outsourcing their survival to tools of their own making. Just as fire extended daylight and stone tools extended the strength of the hand, clothing extended the resilience of the skin. It was a step toward becoming a species that relied not only on biology, but on culture and technology for survival. The first clothing was almost certainly plain, practical, and devoid of decoration. But once the concept had taken root, it was only a matter of time before clothing grew into something more. Beads, pigments, and decorative stitching appear in the archaeological record alongside garments, showing that humans quickly imbued clothes with meaning beyond warmth. Clothing became a canvas for art, for identity, for belonging. What began as survival armor evolved into a defining feature of humanity, one that speaks to both our vulnerability and our creativity. The turning point, therefore, was not a single invention, but a slow dawning. The lice clinging to our seams, the needles carved from bone, the flax fibers knotted by careful hands, all are fragments of a larger picture. Together they tell us that at some moment in the long sweep of our history, humans decided they would no longer be naked against the world. They began to carry their own shelter with them, woven from skins and fibers stitched with patience and ingenuity. It was the birth of a habit so profound that today we cannot imagine life without it. And yet, for untold millennia, our species did exactly that. Clothing was not always with us, but once it came, it never left. It marked a quiet revolution, a simple yet transformative step in the long journey of how cavemen survived without clothes, until at last, they no longer did. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors walked the earth without the protection of clothing, and this extraordinary period shaped not only their bodies but also the very fabric of their cultures, their health, and their sense of identity as a species. To imagine them fully naked in the wilderness is not merely to picture vulnerability, but to recognize the resilience and adaptability that allowed human beings to thrive in a world filled with dangers and extremes. The absence of clothes did not mean fragility. Instead, it meant that the body itself became a finely tuned survival instrument, sculpted by evolution into something no other animal on Earth had achieved. This legacy remains written in our skin, our physiology, and then in the way we gather socially, as the memory of those long, unclothed years lingers in the patterns of human life today. The skin became the canvas upon which this legacy was painted most vividly. Its ability to adapt, through pigment and sweat, through toughness and sensitivity, became the first garment humans ever wore. Melanin, the pigment that shielded us from the unforgiving sun, is a reminder of an age when shade and shelter were not always enough. The sweat glands that cover our skin in dense arrays, unmatched in the animal kingdom, allowed us to run, to hunt, and to persist without the overheating that would have crippled fur-covered mammals. Even now, when we clothe ourselves from head to toe, our bodies remain those of a naked species, perfectly equipped to sweat, to cool, to endure heat, and to adapt. The evolutionary path away from fur and toward bare skin defined who we are in a way that no article of clothing could ever undo. Beyond the biological, there was a cultural legacy that began in those years of naked survival. Human beings came to rely not only on their own bodies, but on each other. Nakedness created a form of equality, where no garments signified rank or wealth, and where the only measure of survival was the ability to work together. Fire shared by a circle of unclothed bodies meant warmth not just for one, but for all. A cave packed tightly with kin was more than stone walls. It was a womb of survival, where cooperation was the only true garment. Even as clothing later emerged, bringing with it distinctions, ornamentation, and social status, the roots of human unity lay in those unclothed millennia, when survival depended on shared warmth and mutual trust. The health of our species also bore the imprint of those years. Nakedness forced constant exposure to the elements, and in response our immune systems became robust, our skin sensitive yet protective, our metabolisms adaptable to swings of heat and cold. Without the insulation of clothing, the human body learned resilience. Subcutaneous fat, distributed differently from that of other primates, gave us a protective layer against chill nights and biting winds. The reliance on endurance over brute strength, made possible by our ability to sweat and cool without fur, shaped not only our health, but the strategies of survival we came to prefer. Persistence hunting, long-distance walking, and the ability to move across open plains were all gifts of a naked species, carried into every generation that followed. Culturally, those years seeded deep ideas about the body, its sacredness, and its exposure. To be without clothes was once to be natural, aligned with the earth, carrying no shame. It was only later, when clothing emerged, that nakedness took on meanings of vulnerability, modesty, or taboo. But beneath those layers of culture lies an ancient memory of naked survival, when the unclothed human was the most natural thing in the world, as ordinary as the fur of a wolf, or the feathers of a bird. In art, myth, and religion, echoes of this linger, stories of original nakedness, of first humans unclothed beneath the sky, of bodies unmarked by shame, but shaped by the environment itself. These cultural shadows remind us that to be naked was once to be whole. Even the way humans view comfort and beauty carries the imprint of those unclothed millennia. Skin, which once had to endure sun, wind, and cold, became a focus of social connection and attraction. The glow of health, the smoothness of youth, the scars of survival, all became visible markers on a naked canvas. To this day, we read stories on one another's skin, even though clothing now hides much of it. The human fascination with touch, with warmth, with the feel of bare skin against bare skin, is a legacy of those ancient nights when huddling together was the only true defense against cold, and when physical closeness meant life itself. The legacy also extends to the way humans adapted their intelligence and creativity. Nakedness demanded innovation. Without fur, our ancestors were compelled to find new ways of surviving: fire for warmth, caves for shelter, leaves and mud for protection, and eventually skins and woven fibers. Clothing was not a given, it was an invention born of necessity, long after the body had already proven its ability to endure without it. That inventive spirit, the urge to create tools, to use the environment, to go beyond what the body alone could offer, was sparked by nakedness. It was a gap, a vulnerability, that turned into an opportunity for imagination, setting humanity apart from all other species. In a broader sense, the survival of a naked species reshaped the evolutionary arc of human migration and expansion. The fact that our ancestors endured unclothed meant that they could adapt to a wide range of climates before clothing was ever an option. They spread across savannas, woodlands, and even into colder regions, relying on fire, shelters, and each other. This adaptability, built on the resilience of bare skin and cooperative survival, laid the foundation for humanity's eventual spread to every corner of the globe. Nakedness did not confine us, it prepared us for universality. What lingers most profoundly is the paradox of strength in vulnerability. To be without fur, without claws, without natural armor, was to seem weak among predators. Yet in that weakness lay the seeds of a different kind of survival, one that relied on intelligence, cooperation, creativity, and endurance. Nakedness pushed humans to become more than just another mammal. It drove the development of culture, technology, and society. The naked species became the thinking species, the storytelling species, the species that could imagine beyond the immediate and find new ways to survive. Even today, when clothing is as ordinary as breathing, the legacy of a naked past hums quietly beneath the surface. It is there in the sweat that cools us on a summer day, in the warmth we feel when pressed close to another, in the fascination we hold with our skin and its colors, textures, and patterns. It is there in the rituals of sharing warmth, in the fires we still gather around, and in the stories of beginnings that often picture humanity unclothed. To understand this legacy is to understand that clothing, for all its importance now, is a recent chapter in a much older tale. For over 100,000 years, survival without it shaped everything we are. The nakedness of our ancestors was not a condition of weakness but a testament to resilience, adaptability, and creativity. It left behind a body capable of extraordinary feats, a culture rooted in cooperation, and a spirit of invention that has never left us. We are, at our core, still a naked species, even beneath the layers of fabric we wear today. And to remember that is to see that the human story is not one of hiding from the world, but of meeting it directly, with bare skin, open eyes, and the courage to adapt. This is the true legacy of surviving without clothes, a story etched into our evolution, our health, and our culture, carried forward with every step we take on this earth.